Like most gardeners, I've got one or two things in my greenhouse I'd be a bit embarrassed to show you, but I've got others that I'm happy to swank with, and at the moment, these are they. Calumnias, wonderful plants, brilliant for hanging baskets. This one's called Midnight Lantern, and as well as having these soft orange dragon flowers, it's got leaves of rich crimson. Behind it, one of the commonest calumnias, Calumnia banksii, absolutely drips with violent orange dragons, but this time green leaves. They all come from sort of rainforest areas where it's fairly steamy and misty, and they belong to the family called Gesneriaceae. Bit of a mouthful, but it's the Streptocarpus family. That's an unusual Streptocarpus called Glandulissima, and it's the same family as this little beauty here, a Coleria, called Digitaliflora. Look at that for a flower. Purplish pink at the back, lime green at the front, dotted with darker purple. It comes from Colombia, from the rainforest there, easily propagated by division, but I've only got that one and I don't want to split it up yet. The rest, though, are dead easy to propagate by cuttings, either from stems or leaves. The calumnia here produces lots of shoots, and all you need to do is take your knife and remove about a 3-inch length from the end. Make your cut just above a pair of leaves, like that, so that shoots can re-sprout from there and grow bushy again. And then with this, you can prepare it into a cutting that'll take on its own life. Just pull off the lower leaves and any flower buds that are coming. So you're leaving just more, I guess, than an inch of stem. Pinch off that flower. And then you can see where the buds are there, where the leaf joint is. Slice neatly through just below it, and that's your cutting. What you need to do now is insert it, and that means sorting out your compost. This is cuttings compost, made myself from equal parts ordinary soilless multi-purpose compost and sharp sand. Now just come over here and feel this. You can almost feel it with your eyes. It's crunchy. It's really well drained so that when the cutting goes in, it won't sit in soggy compost. 3-inch plastic flower pot, fill it up with that stuff. Knock off the surplus from the top and tap it once. That's all it needs to firm it. And then you can just push that little cutting in there, water it in, stick it in a propagator, and it'll root in a matter of weeks. So that's a member of the Gesneria family that roots from a stem cutting. Others can be propagated by single leaves. Take the African violet, St. Paulia. This little chap here has been in this pot for far too long. Not only is he starting to climb out of it, his leaves are showing signs of scorch from sun and from splashing water. The thing to do is to look for a really healthy leaf. Look at that one there, rich green, and just cut it off with your knife with a bit of stalk. You don't need to prepare this cutting anymore. What you need to do now is to fill up another little pot and just push it into the surface. Light tapping to settle the compost, and it can go into the propagator with the calumnia cutting, and it'll root again in a few weeks. And when it does, this is what happens. A little plantlet starts to grow from the base of that leaf stalk. But if you think that's clever, you ain't seen nothing yet. Streptocarpus, the Cape Primrose, one leaf like this can be used to produce several plants. When you've cut your leaf off, cut it up into sections, about an inch deep, and out of this leaf I'm getting a good 4 chunks, and then remembering which bit's the bottom, and the bottom is the bit nearest the crown of the plant, put each section of leaf into the compost. Just make a slit with your knife and dib them in, and you end up then with 4 plants from 1 leaf. Pop that little lid on to keep them snug. Then they can all go in the propagator and they'll be rooted in a few weeks' time. It's a nice, gentle start to life. Meanwhile, out there in the great outdoors in this week's Living Space, Gay Search concentrates on the hard stuff.
Well, now you've drawn your plan, the next stage is to choose the materials for the bones of your garden, the patio, paths, and the fences and trellis that'll give you some privacy. And since these are by far the most expensive items, it's well worth taking a bit of time and trouble to get them right. Now, if you're lucky, you'll have a good garden centre nearby with a huge range of paving materials and fences on offer. And what's particularly useful about demonstration areas like these is that you can see how the materials are going to look a few years down the road when they're well weathered. If you don't have such a good garden centre nearby, then try your local builders merchants or timber yard. The first thing to think about is the style of garden you've chosen. If you're going for a cottage garden look, then old bricks or riven paving would look great. Wooden decking's becoming increasingly popular, and it's a very good choice for a modern garden. And if you want a Mediterranean look, what about terracotta tiles? Be adventurous, try out combinations of paving with bricks or pavers or gravel. Or try tiles either laid flat or on edge. But just one word of caution, in a very small space, too many materials can look messy. And it also helps give your garden unity if at least one of the materials matches those of the house itself. The next thing to think about is scale. Huge slabs just don't look right in small gardens, so use smaller units, or at least use slabs in different sizes to break up the space and add interest. And make life easy for yourself. If you find that the materials you've chosen don't quite fit the plan of the patio and the path that you've drawn up, then change the plan. That way you'll minimise the amount of cutting you need to do when it actually comes to laying the materials. Don't make paths too narrow. They should be wide enough for two people to walk comfortably side by side. 1 metre is a good minimum size. Use your garden centre as a resource. Get them to lay out some paving for you and walk about on it, see how it feels, just as you would as if you were buying a new carpet. And get them to wet it for you, because it may be a completely different colour when it's wet. And given our climate, that's the way you're going to be looking at it an awful lot of the time. And now, privacy. You're certainly going to need something between you and the outside world. And at a good garden centre, you'll find a range of fencing options, so you don't have to stick to the bog standard panels. I mean, look at the strong diagonal lines on this panel. I think this would look terrific in a modern garden. Or if you've chosen a cottage garden style, what about this rustic screen? It would look wonderful with honeysuckle or clematis and roses scrambling all over it. The same's true of trellis. That can make a very good boundary too, especially if you grow an evergreen climber like ivy all over it. It has the advantage of being less expensive than fencing, and in a very, very small garden, it's less claustrophobic than solid fencing panels would be. Think about the colour of your boundaries too, because fence panels don't just come in brown anymore. They also come in white, and of course in green. But you don't have to stick with the colours they come in, and if you've inherited a fence, you don't have to stay with that either, because there are lots of lovely wood stains available now. But again, think about the style of your garden when it comes to choosing the colour. Soft blues and greens look wonderful in a Mediterranean garden, while in a modern town garden, something really dramatic, black or dark blue, could look wonderful. Well, now you've got all the information about materials, what you need to do is go home and work out exactly the quantities you need, and of course how much it's all going to cost. I really can't stress too strongly, it's worth spending every penny you can possibly afford on the materials, because they're going to be such an important part in the success of your garden for many years to come.
Other jobs you can be getting on with this week: give houseplants their first feed, removing dead leaves and washing off dust. Cherry and plum trees may need a light prune to remove any crossing branches or to maintain a specific shape. It's your last chance to plant bare-rooted trees before the growing season starts. Transplant cyclamen seedlings. Deadhead rhododendrons as they need it. And it's usually a good time of year for daffodils. But if you're having a problem with yours this year, and many of them are coming up blind, producing lots of leaves but no flowers, one of several things could be going wrong. If they've been in a few years and they're fizzling out, the chances are you planted them too shallowly. So dig them up now while they're still in the green and plant them more deeply, down to about 8 inches. But if the bulbs were new last autumn and fresh planted and they still haven't flowered, well, the growers tell us that last year was not a good one for daffodils, and a lot of them are failing to flower this year. In that case, just be patient. But Pippa Greenwood's met someone whose daffodil problem isn't quite so easy to solve.
Creating a carpet of golden daffodils is every gardener's dream, and until a few years ago this bank would have been a wall of solid yellow at this time of year. Then suddenly something started to go wrong. The daffodils began to die out and the patch is getting bigger. Now it's reached the point where bang in the middle of the bank there's this huge bare patch. So I just had to come along and find out exactly what's been causing it. These daffodils are in a garden in Isleworth, belonging to an old friend of mine, Mick Rhodes.
One day in autumn, about 8 years ago, all the residents came out one weekend and we planted 33,000 bulbs. Most of them were crocuses, so they were easy, but we put daffodils all the way along this bank. And for the first 2 or 3 years, they were superb, absolute solid mass of yellow. A few years after that, this area that we're standing in started looking a bit tatty, which was a bit mean because it's right outside my own house. And it got worse and worse and worse until you can see now there's nothing here. It's just about desert. We need your help, please.
Well, there's quite a bit of virus around on some of the foliage, the yellow streaking and distorting. That's not a good sign, but that wouldn't really have made so many of the bulbs die out. So what I'm going to do is dig some up, because there are two main suspicions in my mind. One is Narcissus basal rot, and the other is Narcissus eelworm. So if I can just get a few bulbs out, that should give me something better to go on. What I really need to do is just cut one or two in half. So we've got a knife. Now if you cut the bulb from left to right across the centre transversely, if it's eelworm you get a distinct discoloration in rings. You can see it there, look at that. Great, eh? Gingery brown circles, almost concentric rings, which tell you that it's the eelworm, and it does that as it's feeding. Now the problem is the eelworms are actually microscopic, so you can't really see them properly with the naked eye. So I'm going to go back to Wisley, my old stamping ground, and see a colleague of mine who's got a microscope, and hopefully then we'll be able to confirm my suspicions. Andrew Halstead is the senior entomologist at the Royal Horticultural Society's garden at Wisley.
Well, what I've done is cut some of these bulbs in half, looking for signs of eelworm. And having found those, I then chop up pieces from those bulbs and put them in an apparatus like this. The eelworms come out and swim through the filter into the water below. You then run them off into a little glass dish and you look at them underneath the microscope.
So, have they?
Yes, I'm afraid they definitely do.
Well, it looks like I've got some bad news to take back to Mick. So if you've got clumps of daffodils dying off in your garden, at least you now know how to identify Narcissus eelworm. But remember, there is something which can look rather similar. It's called Narcissus basal rot, and it's a fungal disease which attacks the base plate here and kills off the roots. And the easiest way to identify that for sure is to cut the bulb lengthwise, and you'll see that the base plate is rotted and brown, and the brownness then spreads up through the bulb. You really need to take out the affected bulbs and burn them as soon as you can. But as to the virus infection which causes the leaves to yellow and distort and get lots of these bright yellow streaks on them, again the real answer is to dig up and burn affected bulbs as soon as you can. But in the meantime I have to go back to Mick and tell him he's really got his work cut out. All the infested bulbs have got to be dug out, so the whole of that bald and balding area has got to be cleared completely, and then you need to clear at least another metre or yard further into what looks like healthy daffodil growth. Bin them or burn them.
And how do we kill the eelworms?
Well, there's no easy control, there's no chemical you can use or anything like that, but if you sink an underground polythene barrier, a bit like an underground fence, about 45 centimetres, 18 inches deep, that should stop a bit of movement. Then when it comes to replanting, you've got to be careful what you choose. I wouldn't want to put any narcissus in here again myself. Also avoid bluebells, snowdrops and primroses, because those two can harbour the same eelworm. And keep an eye out for weeds, because some, like docks and chickweed, will also harbour the eelworm. It's not going to look the same, not going to have that lovely carpet of yellow, but replant it with something else and it could look just as good.
One bulbous plant that I have a love-hate relationship with is the gladiolus. I find gladioli very unyielding in the garden, in a border. They just stand upright. That's why they're called sword lilies. But I do like them for cut flower. So what I want to do in this square metre of earth here is grow a few that I can cut for the house. They like well-drained soil. They also like a bit of food, so I'm sprinkling on some pelleted poultry manure, which I'll lightly work into the surface. And then I need to make sure that underneath each corm, the ground is extremely well drained. So, corms out first. These are they. This is a variety called plum pudding. Each one you get should be firm and hard. Avoid them if they're soft. Space them out on the surface of the soil so they're about 9 inches apart. And then you can plant them about 4 inches deep. Dig a hole with your trowel, and in the bottom of that hole, to make sure that drainage is really sharp, 1 handful of sharp sand. Sit that in the bottom of the hole, sit the corm on top of it, and then replace the earth. And you can do that right the way across. Now, I could just leave it at that and simply stake the gladioli, as I'll have to do, thank you very much for your company, when they come up. But what I want to do is to get twice the amount of flowers out of here if the cats don't dig them up. So I'm going to plant, get off, Dutch irises in between. Here they are, these little bulbs. They're going to yield wonderful flowers in white, yellow and blue, about 18 inches high. They need to be planted rather more shallowly than the gladioli. So the two of us here, come on Spud, you can help, can plant these in between. And that way I get not only a forest of that sword-like foliage, but also a forest of flowers. If you keep interrupting me, you won't last into the next century. But Stephen Lacey, in our next film, has been to visit a garden that will. It was begun just 12 years ago, but it has its sights very firmly set on the future.
With energy and imagination, it's amazing how far you can push a garden. We're in flat, coastal, windswept Norfolk. But you'd never guess by the plants, which are exotic, exuberant, larger than life. As for the design, well, the house suggests the conventional rectory garden. But hold your breath. It's a lot bigger than you think. It goes on, and on, and on, and on, and on. 12 acres of intimate rooms, narrow corridors, stupendous vistas. In fact, Alan Gray and Robeson's landscape here at East Ruston must be one of the most ambitiously conceived, adventurously planted of recent years. Presumably you couldn't do a thing here, Alan, until you'd dealt with the wind.
No, the wind is the main enemy of the garden, actually, and this being a prairie landscape, all the trees and hedges are gone. So we had to put in shelter belts to start with. That was the most important thing.
Right, and what have you used around the edge?
Well, primarily the Monterey pine is the main ingredient, but we've also used white poplars, sycamores and the Italian alder.
And then you've made lots of sheltered areas inside the garden then?
Well, yes, we have. I mean, we've made this sunk garden because that was another way of getting the wind up there and getting below
Right,
it.
you duck under.
Yes, exactly that.
Right, that's a good idea.
And we've also split the garden up into lots of small compartments, really. So you go, I mean, the one change of mood from another, you know, from a busy area to a quiet area, but it reflects the arts and crafts area of the house.
I mean, it's quite a strong Edwardian framework everywhere, but you've given it this great theatrical spin. Where does that come from?
I think it comes from our personalities, really. I mean, I personally like big plants, and I think it gives the garden an extra oomph, a kick, an added excitement, if you like.
But this larger-than-life planting is a theme right through the whole garden, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This area here, as you can see, is our jungly bit.
You have more lush plants.
Yes, we do. Lush plants and big foliage and...
Oh, you're even growing tree fern.
Yes.
I would have thought it was too dry in Norfolk.
Well, technically probably it is, but we get over that by watering the trunk every day. We keep the trunk moist, so you actually spray it or water it every day.
Do you?
It looks healthy enough, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Because actually it's fairly mild here, being close to the sea, I presume.
Yes, 1.5 miles from the sea and greatly helped by the maritime influences.
This border really is fantastic. Great tropical pizzazz.
Yes, it's a border where you can have enormous fun because there's an awful lot of bedding out each year.
Yes, a giant annual operation it must be.
Absolutely it is, yes. A few things that remain permanent features are the formium, the bananas, which
The
we
banana
wrap in
stays
fleece.
out?
Well, we cut the heads off and wrap it in fleece for the winter.
Oh, right.
And the ligustrum stays out, of course.
Otherwise, a lot of taking cuttings, seed.
Corms, tubers, everything, yes.
That's one of my current favourites, the Impatiens.
Impatiens tinctorius, it's a lovely thing. It's quite a coarse growing looking plant, but the flowers are so exotic, they're wonderful.
With extraordinary spur.
Yes,
at the
it's a great
back.
long
and
spur.
it's delicious scent, isn't
Lovely scent, yes, it is, and very fresh.
it? And you find that quite hardy here?
Yes, it is. I think if most people could grow it, I think if they plant it deeply enough, because it has a very good root stock.
Right.
And from that, it will produce new shoots the following year.
And in cold areas, you could always mound something over.
Yes, give it a good thick mulch of something or other.
Wonderfully exuberant planting in the pots too, Alan.
Yes, I think pot gardening is one of my favourite kinds of gardening because you can actually change your colour schemes and your planting 2 or 3 times a year if necessary.
Sometimes you just have one enormous plant in a pot.
Yes, I think if you've got one enormous plant, it makes a big impression. It's a grand statement, if you like. We've got one pot with a very, very large fuchsia called Celius medley in it. And that standard fuchsia is 16, 17 years old. It gets clipped back every year and put into a smaller pot and is kept under glass for the winter. I think the formality actually close to the house especially helps anchor the house to the garden itself, and it sort of takes the internal part of the house outside in a way.
You carry it right out into the landscape, don't
Yes, the avenues and the vistas go straight out into the landscape, but the actual cultivated areas in between those formal avenues become much less formal the further you get away from the house. Well, here we are in the Mediterranean garden.
you? This is your hottest, driest bit, is it?
Yes, it's the top of the hill, dare I use the word hill, and the driest point in the garden, yes. We decided to garden with the environment rather than go against it here.
And I see you're still setting off into the landscape.
Well,
Any
yeah.
end to the garden in sight?
I don't think so. I see 2 great pools of lavender down there and perhaps an avenue of Trachycarpus fortunei and the Millennium Gates right at the end.
So, still plenty of ideas bubbling.
Oh, many ideas. I mean, come and see us in 10 years' time and you won't recognise the place.
That's it for this week. Ta-da.
There's more practical advice and inspirational ideas on the way next here on UK TV Gardens as we head into the ever-popular gardener's world. So stay with us.